Hello friends, this video is for you. Let's stop Asian hate, and I thought we would start by sharing my Asian American experience. I think what's lacking is people don't know the Asian American experience because it is so varied and people don't ask, and people are like, oh, I don't know if I should ask. It's too weird. It's race. We should not talk about it ever. And um, and so I'm going to share with you in hoping other people, other Asian Americans will share their experience too, and do ask your friends about their experience. And feel free to ask me about anything, anytime. And I am happy that you are curious about me or other people. I am not burdened. I am glad to hear it. All right, so let's start with that. I am Japanese, Chinese, and Swedish. And this is Chinese. I'm quarter Chinese. My dad is Swedish and Chinese. And let's talk about generations for a second. Generations are kind of a big deal. And I hope I'll remember to come back to that. But my dad is Chinese and Swedish, and third generation both, Chinese and Swedish. And then my mother is Japanese. So I am fourth generation Japanese American. Do I speak Japanese? I do not. During World War II, my grandparents had a friend somewhere inland, so they were able to not go to the internment camp and work really hard at a farm. And so that was the time where there's no Japs on the Seattle stores and no Japs, and their things were taken away and all that. And so Japanese was not popular to be Japanese. So you don't want to be caught speaking Japanese because that's not the thing. You'd rather be Chinese at that time. And so my mother doesn't know any Japanese, but we all have pretty good, I think, accents. If we were to say some Japanese words, I audited Japanese when I was in college. Another thing about the Japanese American community in Seattle, if you grew up in Seattle, it was a very small community. And when I run across the Moriguchis or the blah blah blahs, I'll say like, hey mom, do you know blah blah blah? Oh yeah, they live blah blah blah. Because there's a red line district, and that's where the minorities were allowed to live. And so the Japanese Americans were there, and the black community was there too, which were both very small communities at the time. And so they also know each other. And so if there's a black person from 50 to 80 years old, no doubt they do know each other. And I probably know them too, because it's just a tiny, tiny community. So, let's see. And also just a little factoid. My mom went to Garfield, and that's where Quincy Jones and Jimi Hendrix went to as well. And then my parents who are Huskies, went to the University of Washington. They also knew Bruce Lee. Very small community. Okay. How do I identify? I identify as Asian American. I think that a lot of people see me as, oh, you're just like me. Nope, I'm not. I am Asian American. I do not feel white. I do not, I'm Americanized, but I do not identify as white. Now, I claim all Japanese, Chinese, and Swedish, but I really know that Japanese, if I were to claim one, it's Japanese American. And that is because my extended family is Japanese American. And my father, who is Chinese and Swedish, I never got to meet my grandpa. He died when my father was 21. And my grandma, who was blonde, who looked like a movie star, I did meet her, but I mean, didn't hardly know her. And I don't know my Swedish relatives. They were in North Dakota. We went to go visit them several times, but I don't know anything about Sweden or Swedish culture. I do know about Chinese culture. I was in the Miss Chinatown pageant. I was very active in the Asian American community with the Northwest Asian Weekly and the other paper, the International Examiner. Extremely active in that. And in college, I was very active too. This might surprise some of you. I was the president of the Asian Club. Yep, I was. So we had all sorts of events. And however, it's a weird name, APAC, Awareness of Pacific and Asian Cultures. I know that's a weird name, but because I wanted to bring awareness. So it's not exclusively for Asians, but it was for people who want to learn about us, and we want to learn about each other's cultures. So it was more to invite in, and it was very fun as well. And when you are at a white college, it's good to have a group of other people that you can relate to. Because, for example, I went to the University of Puget Sound, and the Black population was very tiny, and there were a lot of Black students that dropped out because there's no community. Well, there was a BSU, but there wasn't enough to feel comfortable. And so I thought it might be interesting for you to know that I was the president. I was very active in the Hawaiian Club as well. Growing up in the suburb in Buffalo, it was very white, and my parents moved out of the Seattle School District, which was very bad for education. Came out here for a better education, and I did have in seventh grade. I met some Filipinos, Filipino guys that I hung out with, but also otherwise it was a white community. And yeah, well, there are a few. There's just a few other Asians, barely. So told you about my identity. Something to know that I do have a program called Aren't Asians All Alike? And that's another piece. I will be sharing other people's perspectives so you can kind of get a sense of there's just how diverse it is. And if I were to walk into a room of first generation people who came over from Vietnam and from China and from Japan, etc., and there were first generation Asians over here and white people over here, I'd feel more comfortable with white people. Now, if there is third generation or fourth generation Asian Americans over here, and it totally depends what we're doing, but just to give you a sense, I'd feel very comfortable here. And if there were, let's say, people who are biracial, I say mixed, but if there are biracial people over here, I would like, oh my gosh, people who are mixed like me. Oh, and I couldn't resist, but like, hey, how did your parents meet? What is your ethnicity? Oh, me too. And I may even be like, oh, let's take a picture together. Because I'm a halfie, and I know there are a number of us around, particularly at Microsoft, but I hardly meet them. And so I want to go with this point where first generation, they have the language that they came over with. I cannot relate. There's zero relation. I feel more comfortable with a white person. But a fourth generation, third generation, which is kind of hard to find, I definitely feel I can relate very easily. So yesterday I met my friend John Chen, who was a team builder. We were both team builders 20 years ago. And I don't talk to him that often, but I was like, hey, John, let's talk tomorrow. He's like, okay. He already knew we're going to talk about Stop Asian Hate. I didn't need to say anything. And then he was like, oh, do you want to do this live? I'm like, yeah, totally. Because the thing is, how neat let's see. I think he's just second generation. I think basically he was born here, extremely Americanized, extroverted, and not shy about talking. And I am just so comfortable. I didn't have to say anything, and we can just talk transparently to the camera, not even knowing what we're going to talk about, because it is so comfortable. And so I think a lot of you think that I am just totally white, and I'm not. And I do feel more comfortable when I am with an Asian American who's been here for a while. Like my friend Andrew, who is Japanese and Czech. Like, we're both half, and it's just like it's so much more comfortable for me. Now, I am comfortable with a lot of people, but when there's an opportunity, I'm like, oh, there's just this relatability. Well, that's what's at the top of my head right now, hair as well as those bits of information. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And I have done a number of focus groups with different generations and different people from different countries. And I do have a lot of resources. Happy to share. Let's stop Asian hate. Let's get to know each other. And please start some conversations with your friends. The problem is being invisible. So recognize your friends, validate. I see you, I'm with you, I hear you. When was the last time you felt like this? Has it been a minute? It is time to mix it up. Climb out on those limbs and jump into life. Life is full of excitement. We just need to get curious, get uncomfortable, and go for it.